Hello, and welcome to this week's SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group bi-weekly meeting. It is February 15th, 2018, halfway through the month of February already, which is kind of amazing. I feel like the year is just flying by at this point. And so let's get right into the call. As always, we want to start off with a discussion around what is the purpose of this call. For folks that might be new to the call or new to listening or watching these videos on YouTube, this is part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program. And because we had grown so much, we started these special interest group calls to allow us to have a forum to focus on certain areas in this call, specifically around client-side development, SharePoint Framework. We have another call on the PowerShell and the Managed Code CSOM as well. So obviously, please attend as many of these as you'd like, but it allows us to do a little bit deeper dive and to do some more focused demos in these areas that people might have an interest in. And so on this call, specifically, we talk about an open discussion around the SharePoint Framework, client-side development patterns on SharePoint. So that includes SharePoint Framework, but also for folks that might be developing outside of the SharePoint Framework, whether they're using script editor web parts or doing some JavaScript and provider-hosted add-ins. There's lots of different ways you can use client-side development inside SharePoint. And so we try and touch on as much of that as possible. And then as well, we talk about the PnP JS libraries that we've developed together with the community to emphasize simple, repeatable patterns so you can bring those into your application. That'll really save you some time and some effort, and you can just build off of the code we've already constructed together. Two links down there at the bottom, aka SPFx-Community, will take you to the Microsoft Tech community. That's a great place to ask general questions around SharePoint development, be it SharePoint Framework or client-side, or any kind of SharePoint development. In fact, that's a great forum for those how would you all approach this kind of a problem. Questions that aren't necessarily appropriate for an issues list in one GitHub repository or another. It's a great open forum to ask your kind of development questions, design questions, how to get started questions. Really fantastic there, and a lot of community interaction as well in that space. And the second link, aka SPDev-docs, will take you to the official documentation for all things SharePoint development. So whether you're looking to get started with the SharePoint framework, if you're new to that, haven't checked that out yet, definitely check out those documents, get started on the SharePoint framework. But as well, if you're working on provider-hosted add-ins, managed code web parts, any of the SharePoint development story, do check out. We've got the documents there as well. So moving into what we're going to cover on this week's call, we'll start with a SharePoint Framework update. We'll then follow that up with a update on where we're at with the PnP JS client-side libraries work. Got update then on the Office 365 CLI, and then as well an update on the reusable client controls. So we've got a lot of stuff going on in the sort of open source space, and want to get everybody updated on that. And then we've got two demos today, one from myself. I talked on the last call about the start of managing client-side pages through PnP JS. That work is done, and I'm going to demo and talk through how that's going to work on this call. And then as well, a demo from Velen Georgiev. And then he's got a really cool sample for SharePoint Framework, which is a React slider. A React slide swiper, so a slideshow that you can swipe through on mobile. It's a very cool little demo, and he's going to show that off. And then at the end, we should have a little bit of time for Q&A, but of course, please, if you have questions, you can always type them into the IM window. We'll do our best to respond as we go through. Before we get to the SharePoint Framework update, would like to always mention some great ways to talk about or to get you and invite you to participate in both this special interest group as well as the larger Patterns and Practices program. The first and my personal favorite way to get folks involved is to demo on this call. So if you've got a SharePoint Framework solution, be it a web part or an extension, or you've got an PnP JS, or now any of the new PnP JS libraries projects, definitely want to see those demoed on the call. I think one of the most valuable things for me is seeing what the community is doing with this work and learning from each other and seeing how folks apply what they can do to different problems in ways that, certainly I might not have thought of myself. It's always very interesting to see. And demo as well, even if you're outside of SharePoint Framework, again, if you're doing something in a client-side editor web part or something, script editor web part, something like that, definitely welcome those demos as well. The community demos are really the heart of this call. Contribute on GitHub. So we have a lot of different repositories you can contribute to the PnP JS libraries. Absolutely welcome folks to get involved there. You can also contribute questions or issues to SharePoint Framework itself at the SPDev docs repository. You can contribute issues if you have issues or suggestions on GitHub as well, so any kind of contribution there. And then just a general kind of catch-all feedback. So we really welcome feedback on everything we do in patterns and practices. So not just the code we're writing and publishing, but also these calls. What can we do better? What are we already doing great? Love the feedback on that. What can we do better overall in patterns and practices? What are some subject areas we could do a better job covering or need to cover, things like that. We really welcome that feedback, and we really try and take that to heart. We can't always act on every piece of feedback immediately. I don't want to discourage folks when that happens, but we definitely look at it, understand it, discuss it on the PnP team, and see how we can work with those pieces of feedback. So really appreciate all the feedback from the community. I almost asked Patrick to give me control. We're going to skip that. So a quick SharePoint Framework update from Vesa.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'm not going to have live demos today because the live demos are for Patrick and Velin, but some updates on things, absolutely. And I think I was able to take over the presentation. So let's see. A few slides, which I always keep on these things. First of all, AKMS SP DevDocs documentation for SharePoint. All of the active documentation is relocated already from MSDN to docs.microsoft.com. So please get in here. If something is missing, please let us know, and you can contribute by yourself on these docs and have a look. And these contain also links to our videos and everything else around the SharePoint guidance. Now, related on gaps, if you're in this call or whatever, every now and then you might feel that, hey, damn, you Microsoft people, there's a gap related on this guidance, or there's an issue over there, or whatever. Please let us know, so we can actually address that. So please go to the GitHub or AKMS SPDev issues or GitHub SPDev docs and issue list, and please let us know. We actually there's within the new version of upcoming new version of SharePoint Framework, within the 1.4.1 version, which is coming out super soon. There is, for example, one hot fix which is fixing one particular thing, which were caught and reported using the issue list. And so thank you for reporting these issues here. And obviously, we do not have an unlimited resources. So that means that we need to prioritize these things, and for sure, it might take a while to get some of those issues addressed, but all of the critical issues we try to address ASAP, as long as we can do the repro for the issue. But anything in API, anything in SharePoint development, please let us know. We'll reroute that directly to the right people. All of the issues what you're submitting in here are actually getting replicated automatically to our Visual Studio Online, which we use as our primary channel for assigning work for engineering, for all the engineers which are working for us. Because if I put my engineering hat on. Now, cool. One thing what I skipped actually from last time as well, 2 weeks ago, this was the first time I showed the slide, but I actually updated that with the latest graphics. So I intentionally removed the numbers, so you don't know what actually is the metric, but the SharePoint framework is already twice as popular from a usage perspective than SharePoint add-ins. And SharePoint add-ins is not, the usage for SharePoint add-ins is not small. So you can kind of assume then how big is the usage for SharePoint framework. I'm going to keep on probably updating this in these presentations. I do not have a sign-off yet from Jeff and Dan and marketing and Rob Howard to explain what are the actual numbers. So I can't give you the number of things. This is actual Daily app user pairs. That means that activations of a add-in or a SharePoint Framework solution or a functionality in SharePoint Framework by a single person. If the same web part is, for example, in another page on the same site, that's not going to increase the number. So it's kind of trying to analyze the real usage of these individual extensions. But again, like I said, I haven't got a permission yet to explain the actual numbers, so I can't share them, but I can show you a chart which is indicating the growth. And the growth is quite phenomenal. So we increased 40% in January on SPFx adoption, which is absolutely huge. Now, cool. So on other topics, so new stuff. The SharePoint Framework 1.4.1 is, well, it's not now available, so it's kind of a faking slide. But this is the marketing slide which I'm going to push out later today, or one of the marketing slides which is push out potentially later today. Oh, I gave it up. Damn. So later today, hopefully, unless there's a really last minute, let's say, cancellation on these things, we will push out the 1.4.1 version, just to give you a heads up on that one because you're joining on this call. Really, the key points of this 1.4.1, there's two massive things. So the number one thing is preview of the new Microsoft client, HDFs Graph client, and also the new Azure AD app client, and both are around managing access either the Microsoft Graph or the third-party web APIs in the SharePoint Online using the SharePoint Framework implementations. And I'll explain that slightly more detailed in the following slide. The second big thing, actually superbly finally getting there, and the fix was quite small, but it's finally there, is the Node LTS support. So we were in a funny situation since, was it late November or December, early December, where we were forced to guide people to install Node 6.x version, which wasn't at all optimal, and the fix for that issue has been delayed for quite a long time because the release of this 1.4.1 release has been delayed for quite a long time. But now starting the 1.4.1, which is coming out really soon, really soon. We're planning to get it out potentially today. If there's a last minute still changes, it might still get delayed, hopefully not. It will support Node 8.x and NPM 5. As the main and supported platform. Now there's an already updated setup videos and all of that for those, which will be pushed out to YouTube and our documentation immediately when we actually push out the NPM packages. Finally, yay! Now, coming back on that graph discussion. So in our monthly community call this week as well, this is actually pretty weird because we have two community calls in a single week, but that's because we had the monthly community call and then we have the special interest group call for SharePoint Framework this week. Paolo actually demonstrated this one in practice. We will release documentation and tutorial, which is going through this step by step. Now, what it means in practice is that as a SharePoint tenant administrator, you can control technically what are the scopes or permissions which are available for the third-party customization, third-party web parts or SharePoint Framework extensions. So you as a tenant administrator or the tenant administrator of your tenant can control and configure what are the scopes which are allowed in the Microsoft Graph, or what is the third-party web APIs which the SharePoint Framework can actually connect to. And then whenever we are actually doing that actual execution, we have a client-side web part in the page, and that's looking into connecting towards Graph, additional scopes in a Graph or third-party web API. It is getting an access token automatically from Azure Active Directory, and then it actually calls that third-party web API or a scope or a Microsoft Graph using additional scopes. So you're able to then access additional stuff available. Now, this one will replace the Graph HTTP client, which was shipped, I think, in 1.3 version or 1.4 version in November or earlier than that. So which was in preview as well. This will be released for preview, and we're looking into polishing the stuff and getting it more stable. But So this one will be in preview, so we're not recommending anybody to actually build any production stuff on this one, but you can already start implementing and you understand how things will be working whenever we GA the actual functionality. We're not expecting any more changing the class names or anything like that. It's just rather polishing the admin experience, polishing the PowerShells behind of the things and all of that. There are certain let's say steps in this flow which are quite rough still, and our exception handlings here and there are not quite there yet. So that's the thing what we need to still polish before we can go GA with this one. There was a comment from Ralph around a long time ago. We came up with a HTTP graph client, and to be honest, we were not planning to have this long release break around the SharePoint framework, but due reasons or another, this was just realities of life. Every now and then things are delayed to small issues, but then they get escalated, then there's another issue or a completely irrelevant thing, but it impacts delays as well. Now in the future, we are already having discussions on potentially moving to a pre-known release schedule, which would mean that there would be, for example, monthly SharePoint framework releases or bi-monthly. So you would know beforehand when the following 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 version would be coming on. So you as a community member or as a customer, you could prepare, and that you would know that, oh, on that week, the first week of every single month or bi-monthly, we would get a new version of SharePoint framework. Whenever we release a new version, it does not impact your existing customizations. If it does, that's a bug. It should absolutely not impact them. And you don't have to forcefully upgrade to the latest version. That's not always needed. Every now and then, however, the new versions have great capabilities like this one, so most likely you want to jump to the latest version. Kind of related on this one as well, next Monday we'll release a webcast which will explain with the live demo how to upgrade existing SharePoint framework solutions from an older version to the latest version. So there is a step-by-step video together with me and Paula where we walk through how do you actually take an existing solution and upgrade that to the latest version. So that's going to go live on next Monday. Just a teaser for that one as well. Why on Monday? Well, because we release our webcasts on Monday, because nobody else is doing anything on Monday. So that's apparently the reason. Cool, and good comment from AC around the scheduled releases. Yes, my personal opinion is strongly with the scheduled releases, because we do that also for CSAM and PowerShell, and also for PnP community releases. We actually, you as a community member, you know when those things are evolving. So you don't have to wonder if there's a new release or not. The size of the release doesn't actually matter. You know when the new release is coming. So we're looking into doing that. There's still some internal discussions. What does it mean in practice? Good, but that's great feedback for our internal discussion as well. Now, moving on things quickly, have a look on the roadmap. This is not going to take too long. So now actual changes in here, except and I haven't updated the site designs, and with the extensibility point has been G8. That's a older slide which is still saying that it's in first release. That's actually wrong. Site designs with an extensibility point are now in GA status, so they are in production. The more Microsoft Graph support is coming really soon. Hopefully today, like mentioned already earlier in the call. Potentially it might be still delayed if there's a really last minute surprises on our side. Hub APIs potentially during end of this month, early next month. That's now the current schedule. Groupify APIs by end of Q1. But we'll see when we get it actually out. Cool. And then Patrick, your turn. And I'll have a look on the IAM window discussion when Patrick jumps in.
Yeah, I'm taking over here.
Cool.
The presentation. All right, so update on the PnP JS client-side libraries. Just a reminder, the github.com location is /PnP/PnP. The redundancy there is just because we talked to the redundancy department, and that's how we did the naming. But it's really to match up with the scope, and really we just needed a name for the repo, and because it's a mono repo with a bunch of different packages in it, We used a fairly generic name there. Upcoming release later today, actually for both sets of libraries. And the changes are going to be managing client-side pages, which I'm going to show off here in a little bit. Get all for the items collection, which we talked about on the last call, and then some new add field methods, adding multi-choice Boolean URL and a couple others with improved typing for the properties available to add those fields. And then working with the CDN JS folks to get support for the new libraries to be published on CDN JS. That is in progress, and that has been accepted by them. So it's just a matter of time now until that actually gets merged in. Obviously, they've got a giant repository that they're doing a lot of management on. So we're in the queue, and when that gets published, we'll let everybody know. But then that will be auto-updated with each release. So a very cool system they have over there at CDN JS. And then I did want to mention we're always looking for feedback on the roadmap around capabilities or things we can help make easier with the library or make part of the library. So we, I mean, I can come up with stuff, but I've been in the field, but I'm really no longer in the field. That's not my role. So I'm not day-to-day working with customers in the way I was in the past. So for the folks that are, if you have problems or you're running into things, common scenarios that you think would make a good candidate to be part of the library, they could be made generic and reusable, would really appreciate and welcome that feedback on the kind of things we can add. So we have stuff we're going to add. We still have plans, but definitely looking for folks, if you have feedback, want to hear that on where we can go with adding capabilities that will help all of you out there in the community, which is, at the end of the day, our entire purpose. So SPFx JS, I've updated the README with the roadmap and an explanation of the transition to the PnP JS libraries. So when that release goes out, that updated README will go out as well. And just a reminder, the SPFx JS library will continue to get updates through a July release. And then after that, we'll kind of hibernate. So we're not going to take it off of NPM. We're not going to take it off of GitHub. So all your existing applications will continue to work. You can always reinstall the previous versions and everything exactly as before, but it just will cease to get the new updates and the new functionality. Those will be put into the PnP JS library as we move forward. So that being said, I'm just going to mute somebody. There we go. That being said, we'll move on now. So Office 365 CLI update. The Office 365 CLI, a new beta version is out, I believe out yesterday or today, with the following commands. So I'm not going to actually read all these commands, but some great new commands in there to help manage lists, get information about site collections, and some additional functionality around custom actions. So check those out. That's a beta version, so you'll need to do the @next or @beta to get that install. And then some work that is in progress and coming soon from the Office 365 CLI folks is more commands around SPO, working on integration with Microsoft Graph. We as PnP, Patterns and Practices, are looking at ways to make communicating with Microsoft Graph easier across all of these different things, which we're sort of limited by what you can do with Azure AD. Obviously, it needs to be secure, so there's only so much we can do, but we are all looking at kind of trying to smooth this experience out for everybody with the connecting to Microsoft Graph. So those changes will come to the CLI and hopefully come to some of the other areas as well. And then updates to the documentation around SharePoint that are going to mention specifically using the Office 365 CLI. And then Waldeck had asked me to express his thanks to the great interest from the community. So a lot of folks that are joining in and helping out, submitting code and contributions. Very much appreciate that. So I'll share my thanks as well. Really appreciate everyone from the community that gets involved in everything we do in Patterns and Practices. So thank you all very much. and we very much appreciate your time, your effort that you put into contributing across our entire suite of work. And then on the bottom, if you're looking to kind of make contact, get in touch, ask questions about Office 365 CLI, there's a hashtag on Twitter that folks are following, Office 365 CLI. And then as well, there's a Gitter channel for Office 365, and that aka MS Office 365 CLI is actually a shortcut to the Gitter channel as well. And then for folks that aren't familiar with the CLI or want to learn more about it, our last monthly call, which was recorded this Tuesday and is now available on the YouTube channel, has a great demo and discussion on that from Andrew Connell. That was recorded on the call. And then as well, there's several other tutorials and videos available around the Office 365 CLI and getting started with that. So if you haven't yet, check that out, and you have a need for sort of a cross-platform CLI tool for managing Office 365, do check out the CLI, very cool addition to the PnP suite of things. Next, we've got an update on the reusable controls. So these are a set of controls, if you haven't checked these out, that you can use within your SharePoint framework web parts, or I suppose extensions as well. Wouldn't be just limited to web parts, but so these controls are reusable and they're published out there. So 2 new versions for the SharePoint framework property controls. We're now at 1.3.0. They've added a new control, so Property Field Code Editor allows you to sort of edit code in the way that a script editor code, or the script editor control, so you can edit code. And then the enhancements for that release, the Property Field Term Picker has been improved with a save and cancel button, and then also an on-click event on the input field, so you can check that stuff out as well. So check out the update for the framework property controls. And then for those of you who are working in React, specifically for the React controls, there's a new release at 1.2.1, which has a fix for the field taxonomy renderer. Got fixed to support single and multiple values. So not a lot of updates, but some very valuable new features and updates there for both the React controls and the property controls. And so, again, another piece of the PnP suite. If you haven't checked that out, do have a look. Again, nice reusable components that drop right into your applications and just generally save you a lot of time and effort in writing these kind of pickers. And you can see examples of these things. So selecting lists, taxonomy pickers, and then the calendar control there. Obviously code that you could write, but much easier to just reuse this existing code. And then a webcast. Again, if you're not familiar with these and haven't checked these out, do check out that link to a webcast that goes over the SharePoint Framework controls, introduces them. This was published when they first originally came out, I believe. So it's not going to have the latest updates, but will give you a great introduction and great idea around using these in your applications and show you the patterns that work with any of the new controls or any of the new updates. So check that out as well. So we're going to move now to a demo. This is where things get dicey, me trying to share my monitor. And if somebody could just confirm when that comes up for them. Oh, anybody? I see it for me. Got it. All right, awesome. It worked. It's happening. This is what we were discussing earlier in the IM window. So it's happening. My screen has been shared. We're getting the MS Graph clients. Everything is happening in Patterns and Practices. So thanks for joining the call to stay up to date. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today is the client-side pages code that's going to go live in the next release that will happen later today for both sets of client-side libraries. So whether it's the PnP JS set of libraries or SP PnP JS, both will get these updates. And we talked on the last call about the ability to add a client-side page. And then I hadn't really gotten much further than that, but I wanted to revisit this and show you guys kind of the finished code. And I bet somebody's telling me to make my text bigger. So let's do that. The first thing I want to point out at the top, I'm working in Node for this demo, so I've done my setup call here to use the SPFetch client, and I've previously registered an application ID and secret. This is using the SharePoint ID and secret to this SPFetch client. And then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to add a client-side page. So this is the piece I was able to show before. This will add a new page. And then we have a call here to get the list of all the client-side web parts that are available in the web. So this is going to include both your custom web parts as well as the web parts that come out of the box. So you're just going to get a big list of those things back. The next thing here, I'm filtering those, in this case based on ID, and I happen to know this ID because I looked at the list and found the one I wanted. But this ID corresponds to the embedded client-side web part, the thing you would use to show like a YouTube video. So I'm grabbing that embed web part out of the definitions, and then I'm creating a client-side web part from that definition. So I've got the definition. I'm going to create a web part from the definition. So this part is now a client-side web part instance created from that definition. So it represents an embed web part. And then we have this method set properties. And because all of these client-side web parts have a different group of properties you can set, that takes a it takes a typing property here in the generic type argument that gives you the properties available for that web part. I've built in a couple, literally two, right now into this, but that's something we'll look to expand in future releases. But it gives you the typings available for this web part. Because I know this is an embed, I'm saying give me the typings for the embed, and then you can see you get the IntelliSense here for the various properties. In this case, there's 4 properties for this web part. The cached embed code should scale with width and temp state. The only one that's required is the embed code, and that's the actual video to the or the actual URL to the video that we want to show. So in this case, we're going to post a YouTube video into this embed web part. And this would work with every kind of web part would have this set properties, and so you could create custom typing objects here as well for your custom web parts when you define your properties that are available there. And this kind of avoids us having to have a client-side web part class for every web part out there, since they don't differ a lot or really at all except for the properties that are exposed. And for those few cases where in your custom applications you might need a custom class, you can, of course, subclass the client-side web part and add any functionality you might need for your application. The next thing we're going to do is add a section to our page and add a control to our page. And what this is doing is adding a control to the default column of that section. And we'll talk about sections when we actually look at the page here in a second, and I will explain that hierarchy a little bit more. And then finally, we're going to await the saving of that page. So note here, I'm calling save and not update. So this client-side page is an extension of the file class. So the update method is going to update that underlying file object. And the save method is actually going to serialize and update the content of the page. So it's a method specific to the client-side page. So just note that, but we're going to await that, so that happens. And I have a breakpoint here just so we can see that everything runs. So I'm going to hit F5. And we're going to let this get spun up. And I'm going to look at the IM window and see if we have any questions while that's spinning up. It looks like no. So moving forward, you can see our requests are going to be going out. These are just getting logged here to the console because I have the console logging set up for this demo. And so I did want to pause here kind of on this breakpoint and show you this part defs is just a giant array of, in this case, I've got 54 items in my array, and these all represent each of the web parts. And you could look at the manifests for these and see, I don't even know, so that happens to be the embed one I just picked. If we look at the 10th one here, title, this is the image web part. So you can see all the different components are then available here in this array. And so you can use those to construct your client-side web parts. And then we'll advance, and you can see by filtering, we now just have the one, so we filtered by ID. And I'm just going to let this run through to completion, and we'll come out through there. So we've saved our page. I'm actually just going to stop our sample there and bounce us over to my site here. For those of you who were on last call, you'll note I've applied a different theme, which is hopefully a little more visually pleasing for everyone. But I'm going to open our new page. And so we can see here on our new page as it loads, here's our embed web part. It's taken up a nice big piece of the screen because we're allowing it to scale with the page. And I want you to note comments are available on this page. And so I want to edit this page, and I want to talk a little bit about columns, sections, and web parts, or client-side parts. So on a modern page, you have this area kind of from below this header to above these comments that is the canvas. And that canvas you can think of as containing all of the content for a modern page. And that canvas is then broken up further into sections. And so sections you can think of as horizontal bands that take up the full width of a page. And so I could add a section above, that's adding a web part actually, so I can add a section above my current section. And I get this option here, so I can add sections in 5 different ways. 1 column, which is going to take up the full width of the page. 2 column, which is going to take up split half and half. 3 column, that's going to be in thirds. I think we can see the pattern now. And these 2 others that split it, sort of a little bit on the left or a little bit on the right. I'm going to pick a 2 column one just to sort of show this. And then inside a section, I now have 2 columns. And within each of these columns, I can add, here's text in this column, and then I can add some text in the right column. And so that's kind of the hierarchy of canvases have sections, which have columns, and then columns have parts in them. And I'm pointing this out here because I want you to sort of remember this for my next thing that we're going to see around editing these web parts on an existing page. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to open another page. So this is an existing page that already is on our site. And so we have a couple things here. We've got a text block up at the top, and I'll edit this real quick just to show folks kind of the layout of the page. So this is a text editor web part, client-side part in the top section. So that would be the first section on the page. And this is the left column has a text part in it, and the right column has the embed web part in it. So this is a YouTube video we're showing you, and this is a funny video about a video conference call in real life, which if you haven't watched this, it's a good laugh, but my boss has come and told me that this isn't necessarily appropriate for our work intranet. So we need to update this, and we want to change the text up here as well as we need to change the video URL of this embed web part. So I'm just going to publish this. I didn't make any changes, so everything's sitting as it is. And I want to go back to the code, and I'm going to comment out this top block here. I'm going to comment out this top block here. One of these days I'll learn to work a keyboard. And I'm going to uncomment this part here, this section of code here. So what I wanted to show you guys is, or show you folks, is loading an existing page. So we're going to use a client-side page from file, which is a new method. Well, all of this is new, but this is a new method from what we've seen previously. And this will actually allow you to load from any file object. And by file object, I mean a PnP JS file object. So in our case, we're doing sp.web.getFile by server relative URL. That gives us a file object. You could also do sp.web.lists, get a list by title, get an item by ID, and then do .file off that item. Would also give you a file instance. So there's a lot of different ways to get a file instance out of PnP JS, and this method will take any of those file objects. So you can get your file object and then call from file. This returns a promise, so we're going to await that. You could also do .then at the end, and we're going to get the page. So the page then is going to be loaded up from the existing content of that file, and that page is our client-side page. So we can access the sections property, which is an array, and it has an array of columns, and then we can get a control. And the get control method takes another generic typing argument. So in this case, and you kind of have to know what's on the page. So I'm going to say, I know it's a client-side text, so get me a client-side text control. And the client-side text control, and this is the index of the control in the column, has a text property, and I'm going to update the property of that text. And then I'm going to get the next section down. So you remember this is the second section on the page. And I'm going to get the second column in that section, meaning the rightmost column. I'm going to get that control, which I happen to know is a client-side web part. Again, its index is 0. It's the first control in that column. And I'm going to set its properties. So this is the same as we saw above. I'm using set properties with a typing method to describe the available properties and give me some type checking. And I'm going to give it a different YouTube URL here to what might be a little bit more work-appropriate video. And then my managers also told me I should disable the comments on this page. So I need to disable the comments on the page, which is a separate method that actually also returns a promise. So I'm going to first store my content changes, and then I'm going to disable comments on the page as we, to follow what my managers asked me to do. So I'm going to run that code, and then while that's spinning up, I'm going to look back over to the IM window here, try and catch up on what I might have missed. A comment on a page doesn't count as a page modification. I think you're meaning for like the modified date, and I believe the answer to that is no. Need to figure out how best to... Patrick, the sections don't really take the full width. So yes, that's a very good point. The sections take up the full width of the canvas. So that canvas is limited in its width of the space it's in, and we'll look at. I'll point that out again back when we're back on that page. But that's a very good point. It doesn't actually take up the entire page, which is what I said. It is limited to the size of the canvas. So Dean, yeah, that's actually, there's a bunch of old concerts on YouTube, that full concert, which is really neat. Those are out there. So if you're into that, catch those up. So we'll go back to our page and refresh this. And you can see now we've updated our text. And I've updated here to the transitioning to the @PnP SP library from SPFx JS video. Great video. It's a little more work appropriate than the joke video, and something I'd encourage you all to check out. It's available on the PnP YouTube channel, as well as linked off the README for the PnP libraries. Check that out. It'll really help you walk through transitioning to the new to the new libraries from SPFx JS. And you'll notice down here at the bottom as well, the comments are gone. So our updates have completed, and just to close our thought out, you can see the sections are limited. So if I kind of mouse over this, you can sort of see the border here. That would be the max width of the section. So they're not actually the full width of the page, they're rather the full width available to that canvas. And then I think that's going to complete my demo. I will mention you can also just re-enable comments. There's a method call just for that as well. So jumping back to the presentation, Velen, I believe you are up next.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great.
And so this will be Velen's demo, so take over whenever you're ready to go.
Yep. Let's see. I've started the sharing, just let me know when you can see the screen. Hello everyone, my name is Georgiev and I'm a SharePoint developer.
I've got your screen on my side.
Great. Got it as well, all good?
Yep. Thanks. Today I'm gonna demo SharePoint Framework React Web Part. So go straight to the demo just to show you what it's doing. I call it slider swiper, but it's the main goal for that web part is to be able to do that. If you can see, we can slide and we can show different pages with cards depending on that sliding gesture. That should work on the mobile phones as well, and then we have that nice little paging at the bottom here where you can directly jump from page to page, and if you can see, that slides three cards at a time, and we have a nice little effect here on the right that's showing that actually that's a slider. These things can be controlled. I'll demo that in a minute, but let's go to the properties and see what else is there. So if we go to the properties, we can see a bunch of more properties here, and I can enable additional navigation here, and then you can see those arrows on the left and on the right, and I can disable the pagination. I can control the slides preview. What else? We have autoplay, so we can turn that into a carousel-like that just plays cards. I can show you that. I simply have to refresh after. Yeah, so it changes the slides every 2.5 seconds. You can control the milliseconds here. And what else we have here is you can have a grab cursor all the way across these cards. You can have a loop. Loop means that if we end here, we can enable that loop. And if I refresh the page, that whenever I get to the last page here, if I loop, it will start from the first again. So some cool features implemented here in the property panel, and you have that accordion that I'm going to show you from the code how it's been done. A little bit nostalgic about the old school web parts. Here we have advanced section at the bottom. Now let's go to the code and see what's there. I'll start with the packages. So the only change in the packages here is at the bottom. There is another package here called Swiper. And this immediately means that I haven't created manually any of those features that you're seeing here on the Swiper, but instead I've used a library. That library is called Swiper, and it has a fair amount of stars, and they say that this is a modern mobile touch slider with hardware accelerated transitions. Sounds cool. But they also have a good demo page where you can see loads of different options for sliding. For example, you might have effects like that, parallax effects or lazy loading. So we can bring even more features to our web part. I've just tried to embed a few of them, but you can have richer property panel here. Now back to the code, the web part itself. If we go here, we can see that we are we can see the properties here from the property panel, and then down below we have a React component that loads the swiper and the cards, and then we have the property panel here with all the properties listed. Some interesting things here that you might notice is how we disable one property based on another property here, or how we set up a default values. Some small tricks around the property panel, and how we can make some use for all the features of the SharePoint framework. Also, that accordion is set like that, group as accordion, and then you can collapse or the different groups in the property panel. Now to the React component itself, We're passing the properties of the web part to the React component. We also have a list mock data, and if I go to the list mock data, it's just a bunch of JSON records. What you're seeing here is as an image, title, and then description. It's simply mock data, but of course that can be a data coming from a SharePoint list or from a REST API. Just to make it more simple, I haven't gone that far. And then on the React components here, we have the root component, which is called React Slider Swiper. And on the component did mount event, we load the data from the mock list, the mock data. Then we update the state of the React component, which will automatically update the screen with all the items loaded from the list here. And then inside that component, I have another tiny React component, which is the card itself. And the card is basically that rectangle that you're seeing on the screen. Now, I'll simply go there to show you that nothing interesting really. It's just a HTML that loads the image and the title and the description. But of course, that can be styled whatever you like. And then because I'm not a designer guy, I always use that. You can see my styles. It's as simple as that. But that can be styled to be more stylish and then more polish it the way your stakeholders would expect. And then how we load this swiper itself is we are referring to the swiper library here. I forgot to mention that swiper library is a native JavaScript. So it doesn't have any dependencies on jQuery, for example, to load some swiping effects. So it's really optimized and really good fit for SharePoint framework. Then we loaded the library on top, and down below, once we loaded all the data and that data is being rendered here, we set swiper. And within that method here down below, we have just options for that swiper object. And at the end, we say, OK, now load the swiper on that element. And now I'm realizing that I have an issue here, and I'll fix that later. So this is the selector where the swiper would be loaded. And these are the options. And the options of the swiper simply get the values from my web part properties here. And I have some hard-coded options as well, but you can bring those as a web part properties as well. So you can see we have different breakpoints so that my web part is mobile friendly. If I go down to a smaller screen, just preview. If I go down to a smaller screen, you can see that I'm seeing only one. If I go to like a tablet view, I'll see 2 there, and that can be controlled as well. These are the options. Once we create that object, it picks out the data and the HTML cards here and then makes them in a nice slider, carousel swiper thing. What else is good to know is like I've added that library here in the dependencies in the package, but probably you should never do that once it comes to an external library. That should go to your external dependencies here. But for the purpose of this sample, I did it like that so you can boot it easily and see what it does. But very quickly, if we look at the stats, again, you see that this is my web part, and this is a web part dependencies diagram. And you can see that my web part is something like a 40K, and the swiper library is most of my bundle. So make sure that whenever you have external libraries, you load them as an external library so they can be used across the web parts, and they don't put on more load here. In the README file of the sample, there is a link to the official SharePoint framework guidance, how you can move that as an external library to optimize your code better. And I think that's pretty much from my side, Vesa, and then Patrick. So you can take over. Thanks.
Thanks, Velin. Thanks, Velin. Good job.
Yep.
And like I said, it's not a massively complex thing, so to say, but I think it's a great web part showing how to make things happen, and it has a great, let's say, the demo content feeling as well, or demo content as well. So great example of a React-based implementation, relatively simple to learn how it's actually built, and then people can learn to do React-based customizations in SharePoint Online. Now, Patrick, closing?
Yes.
Excellent. Where is it in GitHub? It's a good question. I will get you the link on that one in a second. And we do have 6 minutes.
We have 6 minutes for questions.
Real. We finally have some time for Q&A.
I'm looking for the slide swiper. Here we go.
Yeah, you got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Who's fastest? Yeah, let's do a duplicate. Hey!
Just guys, to let you know that I'll create a quick fix after the meeting because I've spotted an issue, but that will be there as a pull request right after the demo.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Velin. Cool. Any other questions related on, let's say, SharePoint engineering? What are we doing? SharePoint framework? Whatever questions?
PnP JS.
PnP JS, controls, CLI. AC is pretty connected on the CLI story as well, so if there's any questions on these things. Just a quick question on Graph HTTP client. When will it, if predicted, the new scopes be available? Now, the Retrica, so the new stuff is what we went through earlier in this call, which is the tenant administrator can control what are the scopes. Graph HTTP client deprecated. It's going to go away. Not going to be supported pretty soon. We will release a new Microsoft Graph client, hopefully today, might be still slightly delayed, as part of the 1.4.1 release. There will be documentation, replacements, everything else on that one. Do we need to update 1.40 projects to 1.4.1 urgently? Yes, would be a good idea to move there. Do Graph API SPFx solutions have lots of manual steps in Azure AD? Answer is no. There's no actual manual steps necessarily there. Now, you as a tenant administrator can decide what are my scopes, which I want to support, and then you can configure those to be available, and that's it. Then SPFx solution doesn't actually impact on the flow. So, no worries, Rodriguez. Yes. Tomorrow there's a recording available. We talked about that one slightly. Money. Thank you, Vesa. I don't know what the money means there. Thanks, Ralph. Created a new SPFx solution and added a React web part after that, added an extension, but the framework selected remains as no script.
If you selected initially to create it as no script and then later added a React web part, the solution would not update itself.
True. That is true. When will be the issue with application customized SPFx when we navigate between pages? We're working on it. That is a page status handling thing. The challenge of that one is that and that's bad excuse because it's internal Microsoft structures, but it goes between multiple teams, and that's always a smaller challenge. So it's not only just an SPFx team who needs to fix on that one. I think we should be pretty close on getting there now. Updating frameworks, I get to do it yippee, and again and again and again. Absolutely. That's part of the story.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we'll start to close out. I want to remind folks our next meeting for this call will be March 1st, and then the next general SharePoint Dev Special Interest Group will be on the 22nd of February, which is next Thursday. So hope to see everybody at both of those calls. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. Remember to learn, reuse, and share, and really appreciate everybody's feedback and participation. Everybody have a great weekend, and look forward to talking soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.